What's up, plant lovers? Devin is here, and I am really thrilled for this video. In this video, I'm going to be demonstrating some tips and techniques for getting our Adenium to produce really nice, thick caudexes like this. So caudex, plants that have caudex like this Adenium, you can kind of think of them like the camels of the plant world, because they create these really thick, fat bellies, which are actually where they store the majority of their water, and also like the water soluble nutrients are all stored in this caudex. And they're absolutely stunning and unique, and there are ways that you can treat your plant in order to encourage that caudex to get thicker. So before we get into any of the tips for thickening that caudex, let's do a brief refresher on some of the best cultural care tips and growing techniques for growing your Adenium. First and foremost, this is a succulent plant that absolutely needs to be outside in the summer months. As long as your nighttime temperatures are above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you need to have them outside. Particularly, they want to be in a lot of sunlight. At least 6 hours of sunlight a day is necessary in order to have the absolute best growth. Once those nights start to dip below 50 degrees, that's typically when they're going to enter into that dormancy phase, and that's when we bring them inside the home. Now, during that active growing stage, it's really unique to note that these plants can actually and should be treated like a tomato plant or even a coleus. This is a plant they can handle being watered pretty much every single day. If you have monsoon rains every single day like they do in Singapore, where I've seen these growing beautifully in containers outside, they're going to absolutely thrive and love that. They like to be watered very regularly during those warm, hot, summer, sunny days. Likewise, they really benefit from a high nitrogen fertilizer. I particularly use this one called Flora Nova Grow. This is a 7-4-10. We remember NPK. N is 7, P is 4, and K is 10. So that's got a pretty good ratio of nitrogen. And if you're looking for this, just go into my little Amazon shop. You can find the link down below in the description, and you can find this listed on my page. Now, you will note that if you fertilize your Adenium pretty much, I don't know, once every 2 weeks or so, your growth will explode. Now, that is the first and foremost tip for getting the best thick caudex growth, is to have good cultural care. Feed them well, and they're going to be actively growing, creating that thicker caudex just naturally without any of the more kind of advanced tips and techniques that I'm going to show here in a second. Now, that being said, when we are growing our Adenium, really and truly, you want to have them in a container that is pretty small, but also that will allow them to grow a nice set of roots, particularly in a horizontal fashion. Now, I have this Christmas cactus here because this is a really great kind of container. You can see that the width of the container is about equal, or probably even a little bit wider than the depth. Now, this is the perfect kind of container for a desert rose, because as your desert rose is growing, if it hits the bottom of the pot, it's going to start pushing those roots out to the sides. And that is going to also encourage a thicker caudex, a thicker trunk to your plant, which is what we want, which is what we're trying to achieve. But then once we get into that winter dormancy phase, like I was mentioning, the nights start to dip below 50 degrees, we're going to bring them inside. Now, inside, you can put it under a light. That's not actually necessary, because we're actually going to restrict water almost 100% from, you can imagine, around like November 1st. For me here in eastern Pennsylvania, zone 6B, I will probably bring mine in around November 1st, and I will leave them inside until maybe the middle of April, maybe even May, beginning of May. And inside the home, I will probably water it once every 2 months or so. It's so important that we don't give them much water in the wintertime, because they're not actively growing. What you would be encouraging is root rot. So in the wintertime, we are going to severely restrict the amount of water that we give our Adenium. And because we're not giving them much water, and because they're not actively growing, they really don't need that much light either. Sure, you can have it by a window, but chances are when they go dormant, they're going to drop their leaves anyway. Sometimes they may keep them, sometimes not. It really just depends, but either way, they're just gonna be kind of in their hibernation mode. So back to the active growing state. Yes, of course, we want those nice thick caudexes, but we also want flowers. So a quick tip about flower formation is that during that active growing stage in the summertime, when we're giving it 6 hours of sunlight or more, we water it pretty much regularly. Eventually, you'll start to see some buds. Now, when you start to see some buds like this forming on your plant, we actually are going to restrict water again. Unless it's actually going to be raining, you're not going to give your plant any additional water at this time. What often will happen if you're starting to get those nice buds and you give it too much water, it may get a little bit too comfortable and it may just drop those flowers altogether. So once you see those flower buds starting to form, cut back on that water until they've had a chance to bloom, and then you can go back to that normal watering cycle, all right? And one last point. Now, in terms of our soil medium, because these are succulents, we really want to have a nice, fast draining soil medium. You can think about using a cactus mix, a succulent mix, or you can make your own. Just get your average all-purpose bagged potting mix and do 50% that with 50% perlite, and you have a really nice free draining potting mix that is not going to hold on to too much moisture, particularly in those winter months. So that's so important to keep in mind, having that right soil mixture, huge. Okay, so let's get to some of the more advanced tips. First and foremost, there's really two great times to do these advanced tips. One is at pretty much the beginning of the active growing season, around May. The other time is just after they have flowered, because if you're going to be doing some of this advanced pruning, you're going to lose your flowers. So if you want to enjoy your flowers first, enjoy your flowers, and then you can go ahead and engage in these pruning techniques as long as you're going to have at least like 6 to 8 weeks more of outdoor time for your plant to kind of heal and then start to create a new root system before they go into dormancy and we bring them inside, all right? So I'm here at the beginning of August, and this beautiful plant right here has just finished blooming, and it looks like a prime candidate for some of these advanced pruning techniques. So when we're starting to prune our desert rose, we want to use clean, sharp shears or a nice, clean, sharp knife. I think shears are a little bit easier to handle. And the first technique simply involves pruning back our branches. Now, when we prune these branches, you're essentially putting your plant into kind of this survival mode, and it's going to stop trying to produce new branches, and it's going to start to pour all of its energy inwards into creating that fat caudex, because like I was saying, that's where it stores all of its water and all of its nutrients. So it's saying, oh, I'm scared, am I dying? What's going on? Let's make a nice fat caudex so that we can store extra water and energy. So how do we actually go about pruning? So when we start to think about where to prune these branches, we want to consider what the plant will look like after the pruning has finished. Now, as we prune, not only is it going to send energy into that caudex, into thickening it up, it's also actually going to branch out. So for me, I would like to have a nice kind of stockier plant that has lower branching. So I'm going to prune it a little bit lower. Now you can see all of these notches on the side of the plant. These are old leaf nodes. So when we are choosing where to prune, we can prune just above one of these leaf nodes, like right here. You can see this guy right here. This would be an optimal place to prune. And as we're pruning, we do a nice clean cut all at once, just like that. So now I'm going to go ahead and prune back every single one of these branches. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because I don't want the plant to have to waste any energy feeding the foliage or trying to create new branches. I want it to focus all of its energy inwards. So that's why I'm going to prune back every single one of these branches so no leaves remain. And if you do have some extra leaves like this, we'll go ahead and pluck those off as well. And last but not least, how about right here? All right, perfect. Now with these little clippings that we just made, you can absolutely save them and propagate them if you'd like. And that's what I'm gonna do. We'll save that for another video. But what we're going to do with all of these open incisions, we wanna keep them safe and protected in order to keep bacteria or any sort of diseases from entering. So what we're going to do with the cuttings, if you're keeping them, and for all of these open wounds, I have some cinnamon. This is just ground cinnamon. And I'm just gonna dip all of these ends in that cinnamon. Or sprinkle it on, just so that all of those open wounds are covered. Okay, so this technique is absolutely going to help to thicken up this caudex, but if you want to take it a step further, what we're going to do is take it out of the pot. All right, look at these beautiful roots. Okay, so this is an awesome example. I'm loving how this is turning out because you can see that this has one main taproot right here. It kind of emanates just like this. So these Adenium are typically going to create over time one central tap root. And what we're going to do is actually chop this back by about half. As well as all of these extra kind of thicker roots, we're going to cut all of these roots by about half, okay? You really just have to make your best judgment about where to cut when it comes to this, okay? I'm gonna cut it off. Now what is actually going to happen by doing this is it's going to encourage nice roots to form along the sides of your plant, and that is going to help create a fatter caudex as well. And just like we did up here, we're also going to sprinkle some cinnamon onto these to keep any diseases at bay. Just like that. All right, so now that our plant is nice and prepped, we're gonna let it sit out in the shade in a nice covered, protected area. It's not gonna get any rainfall, and we're gonna let it dry for the next week or so. And then once it's had its chance to really heal its wounds, we're gonna repot it back up in a nice shallow container like I was mentioning, in that mixture, in that very porous, quick draining soil mixture. And you will find that it starts to thicken up this caudex very well once it starts to actively grow again. Okay, so what happens if you pull your plant out and it looks like this or it looks like this? You can see there's not really any main taproot forming yet. So what do you do in this case? Well, okay, let me show you. So this plant was growing in this small little 3.5-inch container, and this guy was also growing in this small little 3.5-inch container. So the reason it hasn't created that central taproot yet, or anything that looks like I can actually trim back, is because they haven't been growing in a large enough container to allow for that root system to really develop. So before we're able to prune those roots, we got to get it in a more appropriate size container so that it actually can create those roots, which we can then go and prune. So the first step would be to transplant it into a larger container, moving from like a 3.5-inch container to this size. This is about a 6-inch container, not any bigger. You don't want to get too big of you don't want to plant it in too large of a container like I was mentioning earlier, or else that will definitely make it more prone to a root rot or to that softening of the caudex and the failure of your plant. So transplanting up to the next size is that first step. Likewise, you can also do those branch pruning techniques like I was just showing, and that will also encourage that thickening of the caudex for the time being, all right? So these plants just aren't ready for any of the root pruning, but you can see here, I have already pruned off these little guys, and furthermore, I'm gonna prune off this big guy. So if you're not going to be going through with pruning those roots as well as those branches, you can absolutely leave some of the foliage on, and that can help it to recover more quickly and start entering back into that active growing state once again. So really, to summarize, some of the keys to encourage a fatter belly, a fatter caudex of our Adenium plants. Number one, great cultural care. Giving it lots of good water and fertilizer in those summer months with lots of sun is going to be the best method for encouraging a fat caudex to form. Likewise, restricting water in the wintertime when those nights dip below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, bringing it inside, restricting the water, absolutely important for the health of our plant. Having our plant growing in the right medium, quick draining, is also going to encourage the best roots to form and thus the fattest caudex to form. Also, having a container that is wider rather than deep is also going to encourage the roots to form horizontally and thus encourage a fatter caudex to form as well. And then once you've gotten all of those basic cultural care requirements checked off your list, then you can start moving into the pruning of the branches to encourage a fatter caudex. Pruning the branches is also going to encourage fatter branch formation as well as a side benefit. And then the final piece of the puzzle, doing that root pruning like I had mentioned, giving it a chance to heal and to dry before we repot it, and making sure you do all of this at the appropriate time of year, which is at the end of spring or just after they've finished flowering, assuming you have a long enough time frame after pruning for them to re-enter into that active state of growing about 6 or 8 weeks. So if you've been growing your Adenium for a while and you're looking to get a thicker caudex, hopefully this video was a little bit helpful to direct some of your energy and attention into what you can do right now, today, to encourage a fatter belly of your Adenium. Anyways, if you have any further comments, further experiences, please leave a comment below. I always try to respond to all of them, and your comments help to create this Plant Vibrations community. Anyways, thank you guys for joining me here on Plant Vibrations. I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.